Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Transfer Portal CFB podcast presented by NoContextCFB. I'm your host, Dylan Rubin King. We've got a special one-off edition here with so much coaching carousel news, transfer portal news, particularly out west in the Pac-12. We had to get Andrew Haubner, the man himself, a Pac-12 fanatic, CBS Sacramento news sports reporter, and a good friend of mine. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing, man?
You know, I'm good, man. It's very weird, given the last 5 years, to talk about a Pac-12 that's interesting and intriguing and good. But boys, we made it. We're finally here. I'm excited for this offseason.
And the headliner is 1-11 Colorado. That's the forefront of our talk today, which is pretty insane. But they made an insane move. They brought in Deion Sanders as the head coach this past weekend. They were bringing in all sorts of goodies from Jackson State. Good assistants. The transfer portal is going to go nuts. Recruiting is going to go nuts. So we're here to talk about that, as well as the Pac-12, as we've seen in the last week or so with everything going on in the portal and in the coaching carousel. I'm joined by Doug and John. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing good.
Doing well. Feels great out here today.
Yeah, Doug, it's been a long time since you've been on a pod, it feels like. So it's great to have you back.
I'm glad to be back, like, me, I love coaches. I love coaching hires, coaching searches, all the nonsense that goes with that. I'm pretty disappointed that there's not been much flight tracker, but everything's been so under the radar. It's kind of expected nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, you used to write the coaches, the rankings for the FBS a couple times a season, it felt like, and I knew you had to be excited about everything going on in the Pac-12 because it's been a lot of fun. But I want to start with Andrew because, you're the Colorado guy, you're an alum, Pac-12 fanatic, as we introduced at the start. So I'm curious of what some of your initial thoughts were, just to lay the groundwork here on the Deion Sanders hire.
Yeah, so I had a source of mine hit me about 2.5, 3 weeks ago and be like, they're going to make a play at Deion. And I was like, no. Okay, like that's no, stop. And I actually went as far as to tweet it like that. I cold took myself a little bit ago because I tweeted out like, guys, Deion's not coming to Colorado. And it was based off what I had heard from this person of like, hey, there's some actual movement in the AD that this could be a thing. As time went on, I started to hear more and more from some people tied in that, this was a real that they were going to make at him. At the time, you're thinking to yourself that doesn't sound very congruent with what Colorado was looking for. They had their names were like Bronco Mendenhall and Herman. And, you didn't think Deion was going to be that guy. And then about 2.5, 3 days ago, right when the family report goes out, I hear from a second person that is more tied into Deion's camp that basically said, this thing's done. Like, it's over, it's done. And, this person who I'd been talking to for a few weeks now, he had told me about 3 or 4 days before that, hey, this thing's done with. So I went back to him. I go, hey, are we done? He goes, we're done. And so it was hard to fathom, hard to believe. This is like the ultimate relevance play for Colorado, and they did the damn thing, man. Like, I am honestly floored that they managed to make this hire, that they managed to steal the spotlight away like this. It feels good. It feels good to be a Colorado guy right now.
Yeah, no, like I imagine just like something out of the blue, something so like un-Colorado, like making that splash. Because compared to that, Calderell wasn't really a splash. Mel Tucker considerably a splash, but you already know what happened. But Mike McIntyre before him, not necessarily splashes, but this is so uncharacteristic. So I want to follow up on like the point I just made about the coaches I named. So like, why now? Like, why with Colorado, like giving all these assets, like the bonus pool, like all these resources being given to Deion compared to other coaches? Like, I'm going to take Mike McIntyre, for example, right? So you go win 10 games, you reach a Pac-12 title game, And I believe that year you had Jim Leavitt as your defensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe he leaves that following like offseason. Like, why now that the program's given the resources compared to then when there actually was like talent, or like why now? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think the best way to put it is it was now or never. At that time when McIntyre was coaching, they had the 10-win season, and there was a belief that, okay, he proved that you can win within the constraints that the university has, right? So the transfer rules that the school has, which are in the process of being currently changed, are some of the most restrictive in all of FBS. They're up there with Stanford and Northwestern in terms of how hard it is to get kids into the school. And when they were able to win that way, they said, okay, we're going to be able to compete like this. Then they go 5-0 off of that, 10-win season. They go 5-0, and then they lose the next 7. Go 5-7. That's what causes McIntyre to get fired. Mel Tucker comes in, and there's kind of cheap talk, right? Of we're going to change these things, these transfer rules, the money, the upfront requirement that is, needed to be a prime time FBS program. We're going to do it for you. Mel Tucker came from Georgia. He had the expectation it was going to be a Georgia-like apparatus. He gets there. It's not. He's fighting with the administration. They lose a couple of guys to Oregon State because of the transfer process. And he's like, screw this. Like, the opportunity comes from Michigan State. It's a bag. It's an upgrade in cost. And, he doesn't leave them high and dry in terms of like roster construction, right? I mean, he kind of screws them by leaving late in the coaching process, but they didn't need to go hire Carl Durrell. Durrell then craters the program. And so now you need a flashy guy, right? My thought process of right when this search started was you need to commit to what your vision is if you're Rick George, right? Like, if you wanted the energy guy in Mel Tucker, you shouldn't have gone for Durrell. You should have found another energy guy. And if what you want in today's college football world is stability, then don't shy away from a Durrell-like guy. If that's, a Bronco Mendenhall figure, like, just be consistent with what you want. And it's pretty clear that what Rick George wants is the energy. And the way this season went, donors were talking with their wallets, fans were speaking with their wallets, and it started to become a situation of, if you want this program to be anything of any relevance at all, you need to do it now, or it's never going to happen ever again. That coincided with a new university president that is super pro football, comes in and basically does the same. And there's a lot of momentum now from boosters who have been burned in the past of like, we're not going to give money until you get Deion or get someone big for us. Now they've got Deion, and now the wallets are ready to open up again. So it was a runaround way of saying, like, it was now or never for them, and they made it work.
Yeah, so for me, I think Deion was obviously a massive hire, and he's probably the ultimate energy guy, right? One of my questions, you kind of touched on it a bit, so I kind of wanted to hear more of it. You touched on how hard it is to transfer into Colorado. So how is that going to mesh with Deion's aggressive take on the transfer portal?
I think that the school itself is making the changes now. That came out pretty recently within the last day and a half, that, all of the talk of getting things fixed up was actually starting to go into practice and was about to begin. So I think that's going to open some components up, right? Especially if you're going to go after the Travis Hunters of the world and try and, bring him over along with some other guys. I mean, look, I don't know what Shedeur Sanders' GPA was at Jackson State, but the problem with getting into Colorado wasn't just the fact that you had to be a great student. It's that certain transfer credits had to be applicable to Colorado's system specifically. So it wouldn't have mattered in past years if Shedeur Sanders had a 3.8 GPA at Jackson State. If the classes don't transfer, the classes don't transfer. Now what's happening is those courses transfer over, and that's going to open the door for him to do what he does. The interesting thing, though, with Deion that I thought was kind of notable within the presser, he didn't say he's all that interested in the portal as like the way a Chip Kelly would be, right? Like Chip's whole deal right now is like, portal at the expense of high school. And like Deion sounded like he is going to probably go less portal in the long game. this offseason, he's going to raid that thing like Lincoln Riley. And so I do think that opening up the restrictions now and getting some of those things in place now, which I bet was a thing where it's like you can't get Deion unless you do those things. I think we're going to start to see all of that machinery get moved out of the way. Because if there's one thing about Deion too, if this stuff starts to not, come to fruition and these promises are not kept, Deion will not stay quiet. Like he will let them know and let us know. And so he's the only guy I think that has the ability to pressure the administration to do the right things. And I think they're going to start doing them pretty quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, you talked about, the tradition, and he was talking about it in front of the players about, there's a lack of tradition and they've been kind of complacent about it. And so I'm curious for Deion's purpose, with a struggling program like Colorado that hasn't really put together many winning seasons in the last, almost 2 decades, except for that one 10-win season. What was in it for him? Because a lot of people are complaining about him leaving Jackson State when it's the top HBCU in college football, probably the top FCS program. Could have taken a Georgia Tech, could have taken an Arizona State. So what was it about Colorado in Deion's case?
That's a good question. I think the whole him leaving an HBCU is a much more above board discussion for those a lot smarter and with more experience in the subject than I have. But I think the thing about Colorado is that there is no machinery to take away from Deion's accomplishment if he does it there. This program is bad. They have been bad for a very, very long time. And if Deion turns this program around, there is no doubt about who did that. If there's, a Georgia Tech or an Arizona State, an Auburn even, like I feel like for him, there are discountable things that people would hold against him if he succeeded there. Like, Georgia Tech, he's in Georgia, he's got, easy in-state access to recruit. So Arizona State, it's in the Pac-10, or what is now the Pac-10, I guess. Like it's not as competitive as if you went to the SEC. Like if he, goes to the SEC and goes to Auburn and succeeds, it's all the machinery at Auburn, he's SEC, that, he's got everything he needs to be successful. It's not on him. This, I think, allows him to do this his way. I don't think there's many other programs either that will let him run the ship the way I think he's about to run the ship. I personally don't think Colorado has any idea what they're in for here. Like the way he ran it at Jackson State, where like the program was prime and prime was the program. I think Colorado admins and boosters still think this is going to be some like, the pride of the Buffaloes will not be entrusted to the timid or weak. Nah, man, we're in Prime's world now. Like there is nothing that is going to make this a Colorado story. This is a Deion Sanders story at this point. So I think with that in mind, this is the perfect launch pad for him. I mean, Colorado is a great launch pad anyway, right? Because, yes, like some coaches have been fired as of late, but Mel Tucker took a 5-win season and turned that into a bag in Michigan State. Like you can elevate at a position and a job like this. There's good fan base support. The bones are there. And also, it's worth noting, Mike Norvell did not flame out at Florida State this year. And I think that is an interesting subplot of like, if Norvell were to have flamed out in Tallahassee, would Deion be there now? If you take that out, this is a good program for him to spend a few years at, turn into something. Norvell eventually gets fired because they all eventually do. And then now Deion's got a Power 5 head coaching job that he's helped turn around to get to the place that he genuinely wants to be. I feel like there's a lot of upside and not a lot of downside for him because even if he flames out here, it's Colorado and it's sucked for 20 years. Like there's no inherent risk to him in that way.
It's a good point. Like you really can't go anywhere but up. Colorado's tried it quite a few times about that, and to varying degrees of success. Mm-hmm. So if Coach Prime actually does uplift Colorado and say, for example, Florida State ends up continuing on the same track with Norvell, because honestly they did pretty good, all things considered, going 9-3. Do you think Colorado as a program can keep Coach Prime like Deion there? I know they're starting to speak with their wallets and keep everything open, but we've seen like the past year, we've seen Brian Kelly leave Notre Dame for LSU. We've seen Lincoln Riley leave Oklahoma for USC. We've seen honestly this year with Jeff Brown leaving for Louisville. Like we've seen it happen. Like we've seen these coaches go from P5 to P5. Like, do you think Colorado can still keep up with the Joneses and the year for Lord 2022 onward?
100% no. And the funniest thing is, the funniest thing about that is, man, Colorado fans, right? There's all of in the discussion about, Deion leaving Jackson State. There was a lot of people in my mentions, under my initial pinned tweet, which was my report after Thamels, a lot of people being like, he's not going to be around, so like don't get used to him. And I'm like, dude, every Colorado fan knows that this is a rental. We are a stopover on the Deion Express. And you know what? Colorado fans, by and large, I think are pretty okay with that. There is not a situation where guys are career guys anymore. It just doesn't exist in this world. I mean, the Alabama job is one of one, and Nick Saban is one of one. Because look, Saban's going to leave, and I don't know, Dabo might not be a 1-1 at Clemson. Like those types of dudes don't stick around when the money's that good. And you just mentioned like Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley, Mario leaving Oregon and going to Miami. Like the call of homes and alma maters is strong, and the call of money speaks even louder. So I don't see him as a long-term guy at all. I think he's going to stick around for one class. If I had to make my bet, he'd see Shadur through school and then get the job that he wants. Now, whether or not that's FSU is a totally different story, but I think knowing who Deion is, right? And I think some people fell for the okie doke of, his bluster when he first got to Jackson State, but Deion's always been about Deion. And that man was not nicknamed Neon Deion because he did not like the spotlight. You know what I mean? Like he wants to be the guy. He wants to be the God. And so if you're going to be that guy, you're not going to be it at Colorado. Like you're going to be that at Alabama. You're going to be that at Florida, Florida State, or I don't know, pick a program, Michigan, Ohio State, et cetera. Right. So that will always be an allure to him, I think. And that means that eventually he's going to leave Colorado. And I think fans are fine with it because as long as you give us what we need and help us restabilize and reestablish as a program of at least decent competitiveness and relevance in the nation, I don't think any Colorado fan has any issue with that being the way that this thing works when all is said and done.
Yeah. So my next question for you would be, obviously Colorado had a pretty rough year last year with Carl Durrell. What does a successful first year under Deion look like to you?
That's a good question. I think it is dependent on what his roster looks like, which we got to wait to see what the portal brings and, who he manages to recruit here down the stretch into signing day. If the roster builds up to being something worthy of a Power 5 roster, because the roster this year was not, Sac State would have beaten this roster by 30. I would say I would like them to go bowling, like a 6-win floor. If you're bringing like Shadur and Travis Hunter and, all of these guys that are rumored to be coming along. If you manage to bring all of those guys and this roster is like a mid-tier Power 5 program, I would like to see them win 6. I think he's got the staff for it. I mean, dude, Sean Lewis's offense there, running tempo at altitude is going to be absolutely crazy. And, defensively, with Charles Kelly coming from Alabama, I mean, he's a high riser, one of the brightest names in the game. I think the Zimmer rumors I thought were so dumb because I was like, I can't imagine old crusty Mike Zimmer like going into some high school kid's room being like, here's an NIL bag. Like we're gonna do some money, like come, that's not, he's an NFL coach and he's like a crabby NFL coach too. He's not
he's like one of the older guys.
Yeah, like there was no way that he was ever like, sure, maybe stick around as like an advisor or an analyst, but like, bro, there was no way he was ever going to come as like an actual DC that had to recruit. Bringing Charles Kelly is great because I think that's the guy Bama fans wanted in the frustration of hoping that Pete Golding gets fired. Like that was the guy they elevate in that way. So with Kelly, with Lewis, Deion, I think is a good coach. How good of a coach he is when he doesn't have a massive talent advantage at his hands is still kind of remains to be seen. But 6-6 is I think would be what you want. You want to see a bowl game that brings you relevance, that makes you competitive. And then anything after that, we'll see what the rosters look like. I'm curious to see how Deion handles losing because he's going to lose here. And he was not losing a lot. He's not going to go 26-5 at Colorado. So I want to see what the prime experiment looks like when it's a 500 team as opposed to a SWAC champion team.
And people seem to forget that. Look at what Jackson State did last offseason from the portal. They brought in a bunch of Power 5 guys from like Florida State, Texas A&M, Miami, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were loading up in the portal. And with the resources that they've got in Colorado and are going to have in Colorado, I definitely think that bullying is not crazy. But I feel like for me, from my perspective, I feel like we could see kind of like an Arizona type season like we saw this year where they were 5-7, but still made some noise, were competitive, got a lot of guys in the portal, pulled off an upset, something like that. But yeah,
sorry, Liam.
Yeah. Yeah, Liam is our UCLA guy. But speaking of to the portal, we all saw the speech he had to the Colorado guys and the quote about he's bringing his luggage with him and it's Louis. And, telling guys to jump in the portal and do what you got to do and saying that they've been complacent and all that stuff. As a whole, as someone who's followed this program for so long and been around it, how did that speech in all its entirety strike you?
Well, I mean, you guys cover college football, and Dylan, I know you've been in the rooms with Mario and Dan Lanning at Oregon. Like, man, those conversations are pretty normal. People just, don't see them in public like that. And I think what's amazing about Deion is that he puts all that stuff out on Front Street in a way that is inherently about him and like how he is delivering the message. But at the same time, I mean, he's just doing what all these coaches do in back rooms and then don't tell you about. I mean, there are things under the surface at Oregon, for instance, of how Lanning has handled some of the guys that were part of the Cristobal era and how they got sort of matriculated out or didn't play as much this year. Like those things exist. I think the context of what Deion was saying to those kids was cut into a snippet. And obviously when we're doing 2 minutes and 20 seconds on Twitter, it's hard to see the bigger call to action of like, it's a motivating tactic to get those guys to play and practice harder and earn spots. But I mean, dude, these coaches come in all the time and are like, get out of here if you're not gonna play. Like I'm bringing actual dogs and like this program sucks. That stuff exists everywhere. I mean, we can use another Oregon example in Mario, right? I mean, dude, Mario's entire season at Miami this year has been literally openly telling the press how much disdain he has for the culture that he has inherited. He is telling kids, like, if your parents think that you should play more, they can come pick you up at the facility. That's what he's saying to reporters. Think about what he's saying in those team meetings after one of his players walks off the field in frustration. Like these guys say all sorts of stuff behind closed doors that is never reported on. And I thought it was really interesting, the amount of pearl clutching from college football media members being like, how, this is horrible. Like this is, Deion being so foul toward these kids. Like, no, man, that's how it all is everywhere. He's just more open about it than all those other guys are. So I don't have any problem with it because you know what? The cream will rise to the top. And the kids that want to stick around and the kids that want to earn the spot, they'll earn it. And the other kids, they'll hit the portal. And that's why we have the portal. So if you don't like the opportunity you have, you go find one elsewhere.
Well, and the last thing I want to mention, Doug, I'll let you in just 1 second, but the fact that his son's media company is out there with cameras and everything that they're going to be doing, I feel like you're going to get kind of an exposure into what the insides of a Power 5 program look like with, the well-off media or whatever it's called. I think we're going to get a pretty good taste at what that kind of stuff looks like. So go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so I actually want to take it's Deion related, but not necessarily Deion. So while Deion is he's literally one of one. I think he's probably the first FCS coach to Power Five since Jim Tressel, if I'm correct. Do you see this like being like more of a trend, or do you just see this as like a one-off because of like the gravitas and the quick success Deion's had at Jackson State?
I think it's probably just a Deion thing. Bomani Jones made a great point about this, that, Jackson State kind of let him skip the line a little bit because he had never been an assistant. And he doesn't seem to be the guy to want to be an assistant. He wants to be the head coach. And so an HBCU did provide him the opportunity to be a head coach without being anyone's assistant first. And now at Colorado, he's getting to make that jump. That does not happen with normal coaches, let alone black head coaches or black football coaches who just have a hard time getting in the door at all. So we're talking about, I think, a very unique situation. But there are, I think, pipelines from like FCS to G5 to P5 in one linear trend that I think are doable, right? I think another FCS to Power 5 guy would be like Chris Kleiman to Kansas State, right? Like going from North Dakota State, multi-time national championship winning coach at the FCS level, and then you bring him up to K-State. And K-State, they've been pretty good under him since he's been there. I think if you are truly an elite level coach like that, there is an avenue for you. I mean, there's a rumor right now out here in the Capital Region about, Troy Taylor and Stanford, that there is legitimate traction and interest there. But to do it with the mystique of Deion is a one-on-one. I also do think, too, the HBCU to Power 5 pipeline head coach to head coach, that doesn't exist outside of Deion. That is a singular achievement that only he gets the luxury of experiencing.
You mentioned like two names that I should have mentioned, but I don't know why I blanked on Kleiman, especially because of this past weekend. Mm-hmm. And then Harbaugh's like one of them. So.
Oh yeah, because he was at San Diego.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
All right. So for me, you cover the Pac-12 in general, so I want to know what your thoughts on would be. What team should be more excited for their hire, Colorado or Arizona State?
I think they both should be. It is insanely infuriating that it took the conference like 5 years in the wilderness to just start acing the hell out of all of their hires. And also like hiring guys that are like locally tied in dudes who are like, hey, maybe all this talent that we have here that we're bleeding off to every Big Ten and SEC program under the sun, maybe we should keep some of these guys. Like it took 4.5 years to figure that out. And yet, it's good that we're in this situation now. I think holistically, if I'm an Arizona State fan, I'm excited for Kenny Dillingham. If I'm a Colorado fan, I'm excited for the relevance play of Deion. I'd put them on equal terms, just in different ways. I think Kenny is a really good dude because he is kind of going the Jeff Traylor at UTSA approach, right? Like he's keeping Sean Aguano. He brought Charlie Regal back, which is a whole funny inside kind of story between him and Kenny Dillingham. He's bringing back all of these ASU. Rashad Samples is back from the Rams. Like all of these guys are ASU dudes who live and breathe the program and are super tied into the Arizona high school scene and aren't going to make the mistakes of the Herm Edwards era, which was basically Antonio Pierce telling a bunch of high school recruits, you need to beg to get our offer if you are an in-state Arizona kid. And so I'm very excited for them because I think from the standpoint of building the program back and becoming a state program again, he is the absolute right dude for that job. They don't need a relevance play. They especially after Herm, they need to get out of the spotlight for a second. For Colorado, you need all the spotlight you can get. And whatever questions we're going to have about Deion's ability and proficiency as a coach, as a game manager, how he handles losses, all of that pales in comparison to the relevance that Colorado just had. They did $50,000 in online revenue the first day he got hired. I mean, like that's absurd. And all of the numbers that, the team posted on that graphic today of all of the various ways in which the team engaged with the public in a way that it hasn't in 30 years, at least in a positive way.
There's two different ways to be excited, but I'm equally excited about both. I do think ASU will be better immediately than Colorado will. I think Colorado is likely to recruit better than ASU, though.
All right, cool. So did they both ace their hires, but for different reasons?
Yeah, I would say I'd go B+ for Kenny, just because I think there's still some unknowns about him as a head coach. We know about him as a play caller, but that's that step from OC to head man is one. I'd say B+ A- for ASU, A+ for Colorado.
And Dillingham is 32 years old. Like, he's the youngest guy, I think, at the FBS level. I know for sure Power 5 level.
Sean Lewis was the last one. When he went to Kent, he was 32 years old. Right. So this is another Sean Lewis type of situation, but I think he has more experienced guys around him, and I think he's got more program backing around him.
Piggybacking off of the recruiting trail a little bit, Colorado hasn't had, I think I read it was a top 30 recruiting class since 2008. And there is a lot of talent in the surrounding area that I'm sure that Deion is probably going to jump into. But how much of a turnaround realistically and immediately could we see on the recruiting trail in Boulder?
We make this mistake all the time with Colorado, right? Where everyone's like, wow, it's like got to be such an easy place to recruit to. It's not. Some of us in college football media who love our IPAs and our mountain hikes and kind of hipster stuff, we look at Boulder as like, oh, that'd be paradise. Like, if you're an SEC level athlete from like Warner Robins, Georgia, I don't necessarily think Boulder is like the place where you'd be the most excited to be. Not to mention the fact that people mix Boulder and Denver a lot. Boulder is not Denver. And Denver is already, kind of has a reputation for, not exactly being a super diverse city, and also kind of having a bit of a one-track mind in terms of what it's into, namely a bunch of, kind of techie, granola, outdoorsy people. Boulder is even more techie, wealthy, NIMBY, and I mean, it's borderline antagonistic toward the university in the first place. So there is, I don't think like the floodgates are going to open on recruits, because there's still a lot of built-in challenges there, not just of having kids, but keeping kids. And the type of people that Deion is going to go for, there is a reference point for the last time this happened. And it was when Bill McCartney was reaching into South Central LA and pulling kids up to Boulder in the 90s. And, there were a lot of issues that happened there with the general populace of Boulder, not being as enlightened as they liked to think they were when it came to the experience of the Black athlete. So I think that there's going to be a lot of how well can you recruit and overcome that? How well can you retain talent and overcome that? That being said, the transfer portal being what it is, it wouldn't shock me if he can immediately turn this roster over. Is a top 25 class out of the picture? Yeah, I think it's probably too late in the process for that. But I don't see why, if he gets the right dudes to transfer, it couldn't get into the top 35, top 40. That's right around the level of, like, I think at 247 right now, Arizona's like 44. I think programs adjacent to it, Stanford's at 47. Like, I think you can be in that realm for sure this year alone. Whether or not they get to top 25, I'm not sure. That also comes down to the NIL money as well. But there are some things that work against Boulder that don't work against USC, that do not work against even a place like Arizona State, that Colorado just, they got to get through those things. So, I'm curious to see just how high he can go here.
Yeah, no, like, I'm just like recruiting Deion. That's a strong suit. He'll definitely bring in a whole bunch of talent. Like Dylan said earlier, to be like Jetfish at Arizona, have that good turnaround, like with just all that influx and all that talent. So for me, taking you to the first home game, Colorado, versus Nebraska. Old rivals face again. Like, you imagine Boulder being the most hype it's been since God knows how long. Take me through like how that game day will be different from game day, say, from like Darrell, McIntyre, all the others, just because it's Coach Prime and all the fanfare. You have Deion Jr. doing all the media and all that. So, like, I mean, I know you like fans haven't interacted with Deion Jr. like as much or his fanfare as much, but like, just take me through like a perspective of what that could be like.
So the last time I think a game carried this much hype into Folsom was probably when the Nebraska rivalry was renewed. So that one in Folsom was 2019 because I watched it. I was watching it in a hotel room in Honolulu because Oregon State was playing Hawaii. And so that game had so much juice behind it because it was the reignition of a rivalry that had been dormant for about 10, 15 years. The amount of energy that's going to come into this, especially if he rocks the portal and turns over this roster the way we think he might, it's going to be unbelievable because it's not just Deion that's going to be bringing the juice in here. Matt Rule's going to turn over that roster at Nebraska as well. And these are two guys that are making $50 million plus, not $50 million, but I mean, Deion's like $5-6 million a year. And then I think Rule's at like $7.5 million a year. These guys are making big baller contracts here. They were the two biggest names of the cycle, arguably. And now you're going to pit them against each other in arguably the best rivalry in the Rockies and the Midwest for that matter. I mean, dude, I don't think I can explain just how huge that's going to be to Colorado fans. I think people don't understand. Colorado's a good fan base. Like, they're a really, really good fan base. And them in Utah, I think, get lost in the national conversation because they're in what I think is the most flyover time zone. Their fans are incredible. They sell out consistently. Like Colorado, their student sections were sold out until about 3/4 of the way through this year for a team that was objectively, can I cuss on this podcast?
Yes.
A
Go
team
for
that
it.
objectively dog shit. Like this team was an abomination to the sport of football. Whoever invented the game was rolling over in his grave watching this Colorado team play this year. And yet, the student section filled out on a regular basis. This place loves its football. There is an affinity and an affiliation to this team, and they've never seen, there's people that have been fans for 15 years and have seen one good team. So if you're going to take this promise of Deion Sanders, then add on Nebraska and Matt Rule, and it's week 1 when the weather in Boulder is at its best, I mean, you might be getting one of the most hyped games in Colorado in 20, 25 years. I mean, maybe in the modern era. I think I'm confident saying that.
Yeah. So for my next question, I wanted to talk about another Pac-12 job opening in Stanford. What have you heard about that job? And do you think they'll be able to make a hire that can kind of compete with Colorado or Arizona State, or do you think they'll go with a more like stable hire?
You know, I wish that I hope this job goes to Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, because Clawson is the type of dude that, I feel like would be willing to stick around to place long term. He's a guy where it takes a couple of years for like the claw fence and the system to like actually be set into place. But once he does, it will work. I think Stanford, the problem with them is like, you need Stanford to either be really good or terrible. Their fan base and alumni base is not good enough that you can have like a 6-7 win Stanford and it like be okay. You either have to have Stanford be Harbaugh level and have its fan base active and engaged so people in the Bay Area are actually caring about it, or you need them to be an afterthought so you're not doing what the Shaw teams have done the last 4 years, which is basically be a spoiler team for any reasonably good Pac-12 program and then suck the rest of the year. Clawson would be a dude where like you could reasonably get some juice back in as a 9-10 win team each season and be competitive. Troy Taylor, I can say this. This is me reporting. There is some interest from Stanford's side for Troy Taylor, the Sacramento State coach who has won the Big Sky twice. He's taking his team. They're the 2 seed in the FCS playoffs right now. They are hosting this Friday Incarnate Word, and they just lost their head coach. DJ Kinney went to Texas State. So this could be the year that Sac State actually makes a run at an FCS national title. He hasn't lost a Big Sky game in 2 years. And for those listening that are not familiar with the Big Sky, it is the SEC of the FCS currently. There, at one point this season, were 5 teams in the top 15 of FCS football that were from the Big Sky. And he is absolutely taking a bulldozer through the entire conference and has for the last 2 seasons. He is a guy that has basically every program he's ever touched has been a champion level program. He fits Stanford's mold. He's actually a Cal graduate and knows the area of Sacramento super well. I mean, if you're talking like a Jeff Traylor-esque kind of hire of like revered high school coach who can have a connection anywhere within Northern California, Troy Taylor's one of those dudes. So I think that if Stanford were smart, they'd make a legitimate run at him. But, you know, there's the Derek Masons and the Mike Bloomgrens of the world that are there in the running for this position. And it being Stanford, you know, I think I would like to see someone who can like really legitimately compete at a top level. I don't want to see a 6-win Stanford coach that knocks a Pac-12 team out of the playoff or out of like a New Year's Six discussion every year. That when them and Cal do it, I hate it more than anything, because not only are you not giving anything to the conference and like making your campus excited about your team, you're messing it up for everybody else. So hire a guy that if you're going to mess it up, at least make sure your team can benefit off of it and let us benefit off of it.
It's a really good point.
Awesome.
Yeah, he led right into my question about Stanford. You know, given the coaching moves in the Pac-12, really in the last 2 seasons, 2 off seasons, with landing at Oregon, DeBauer at Washington, Dickert, you could say, even at Washington State, and of course Prime and Kenny Dillingham this offseason. What kind of pressure do you think this puts on Stanford and Bernard Muir to make the right hire here? You know, and should they take the Colorado approach and think about, you know, I don't want to say alleviating, but making it easier to use the transfer portal? Because if you look at that roster as well, they're far behind from a lot of their counterparts, not just in their state, but in the conference.
I think the tricky part with Stanford is that because of its academic prestige broadly, you can't touch the transfer rules and regulations. Colorado can, because, you know, realistically speaking, like the academic rankings for Colorado have gone down the last handful of years. It's not the program of prestige that it actually was when it joined the Pac-12. It's actually got some work to do to regain some of that status. Stanford, on the other hand, is Stanford. And if you are going to talk about relaxing these things for athletes, you also have to talk about relaxing it for general students. And Stanford's not going to go for that. So the problem with Stanford is that Northwestern and Vanderbilt, I think, are the 3 hardest jobs in the Power 5 or in all of college football right now, because you can't effectively use the portal in a way where you can easily lose guys. You can't replenish them and bring them in. So you have to commit whole hog to being a developmental program. And that's why a guy like Clausen is a good type of dude for that. There are no short-term fixes at Stanford. If you're going to hire a dude, you should be willing to commit to them for 4 years, because you have a legitimate feeling that they're going to be the right the right person to get this thing back on the tracks. There's no other way that this is going to work. There's no, you know, Prime's 101, but like there's no energy guy that's going to fix this at Stanford. Like you have to go in and you have to commit to a top-down rebuild and know that you're not going to get anything until year 3 at the absolute earliest. And again, that's because Stanford is Stanford academically, and, you know, I mean, that's a good thing for them, but it definitely doesn't help their football program, especially in today's college world, man. It's a different world, and you can directly correlate the transfer, the NIL, the changing the nature of the game, you can correlate that directly to David Shaw's teams taking a noticeable dip in recruiting. You can't necessarily claim a noticeable dip when he had the same staffers every single year at OC and DC who ran the program into the ground, but that's a David Shaw discussion for another time, Exactly.
All right, so I want to focus on NIL actually. Like,
all right.
I am not as familiar with Colorado's like NIL collective. I know like now I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, because like I said, I'm not familiar with it at all. I'm assuming like now like it's because of like Deion and all the attention, and because at the end of the day, football is free advertising. Like it's a free advertisement for the university. So you're gonna make your monies back, whether it's through applications, like tickets, all that kind of stuff. So like how I'm just curious as to like the NIL collective and like how that's gonna help not just Prime, but like also all Colorado sports in general. Because there's a residual effect.
Yep. So a new NIL collective was just put together a few days ago called Reimagine Athletes. So that's going to focus on education grants to football, men's and women's basketball. And so that's one. There was a lot of behind the scenes hand wringing at CU this year because the Buffs for Life organization, which is, kind of an alumni association of sorts, was being sort of pushed to become an NIL collective. And there was a lot of pushback and back and forth and uncertainty about like, should we become an NIL collective and like go in full 501c3 status and do this? And other people thought, if you do this, it's going to take away donations, like general donations, because people think that the money's only going to go to football players. And, we don't want the donor base fighting over where the money goes. And eventually the cooler heads prevailed of like, look, if you want to compete, you need this. So right now there's two NIL collectives that are, in effect at Colorado, for right now. They're, just getting started. They're not a full operation by any means. This is going to be, I think, a lot of pledges and low-level stuff. The University of Colorado is one of the smallest athletic departments in the country. It does not have a baseball team. It does not have a softball team. It does not have a men's soccer team. No wrestling. There is no track and field. They don't have a lot of what other schools have. They don't have a multi-purpose field for their women's soccer and women's lacrosse programs. They don't have a tennis team. Like, they are operating on as bare bones a level as a Power 5 institution can operate. So these NIL collectives, the hope is you get the football team up into the right place and the basketball team up into the right place with these things, and the money that you get by being competitive can then be brought back into the program to do what I assume they've been wanting to do for about 8 or 9 years now, which is get a couple of programs back, be able to have the funds for a multi-purpose stadium to house your other field sports, and then lofty 2025 year out goal, have the expectation of bringing back one of the major sports, your baseballs, your softballs, that can be an additional revenue stream for you. But none of that stuff happens without football. And right now you got to pay up, you got to spend money to make money in today's college football world. So I think that's what NIL is going to be viewed as for Colorado in the near term, is a means to an end to help Prime get the guys to be able to hopefully in future years have the downstream effect for the other programs.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you is, what was the biggest mistake that Karl Dorrell made that Deion has to avoid?
Oh man. I think Karl Dorrell's biggest mistake was just thinking that he knew better than everybody else. At least that was like the vibe that I got from it. He didn't have great hires off the rip. I mean, his offensive line hire in his initial year was like a laughably disastrous move. So much so that like when he got fired, he was trying to sell his gear on Facebook Marketplace. I mean, it was like an absolute, people were laughing at him in the meeting rooms. Like, it was a mess. It was a mess culturally.
Mhm.
And I think Darrell's big issue was that, he thought he knew more and knew better. And, if only you knew what I had to do or deal with, you would understand. I think look, Deion thinks he knows better than everyone regardless. I don't think we have to worry about, that being necessarily a mistake. But I am curious, again, to go back to what happens if he starts losing. If there's glaring errors, is Deion going to cop to those things? Like, is he going to make adjustments? Is he going to alter his approach if what worked at Jackson State doesn't work in Boulder? That's going to be a pretty big question, because Karl Dorrell seemed absolutely unwilling to change one iota of his approach, and the approach turned into literally the worst team in college football, and maybe one of the worst teams in college football we've seen in like 15 years. I'm not saying Deion's going to do that or is destined to do that if he doesn't alter how he handles things, but I am curious to see if he is able to pivot if what he thinks works doesn't work at Colorado.
Absolutely. The last thing I wanted to bring up before we let you go is outside of Boulder, Colorado, because we know that's, what we've been talking about for most of the show. But outside of that, what is your favorite coaching hire made in the Pac-12 so far this cycle?
Oh man, that's a great question.
Not just head coach, by the way. It could also be assistant.
Yeah, assistants as well. Whoever replaces Alex Grinch will be number one if Lincoln ever decides he wants to get rid of him. There's a whole pot. You could do a whole other hour on that weird marriage and why that is what it is. I would say I really like the Will Stein hire at Oregon. UTSA is a product of Frank Harris, sure, but at the same time, that offense is fun. Like, that offense is objectively super fun to watch. They rip apart Conference USA, and they're going to do the same to the American. And on top of that, Jeff Traylor, and people don't realize this, right? When Matt Rule basically like fixed Baylor, right? He had coaches on his staff, like Texas-based coaches, that knew the whole area and were able to, take that experience with them. Joey McGuire was one, and at Baylor was able to go to Texas Tech, and then now Texas Tech is really good at recruiting these local Texas kids. The experience that Will Stein got under Jeff Traylor, who is another one of these Joey McGuire legendary Texas figure type guys, is going to help him so much when he's coming from Oregon and going into rooms in Texas. And I think what makes it particularly intelligent is Dan Lanning and company notice you don't find offensive and defensive linemen on the West Coast anymore. They don't exist. You find them in Utah and you find one or two in Colorado, but where you have to go is to the Southeast and to Texas. And if your offensive, mind and your OC is a Texas guy with deep connections into the state of Texas, that's going to allow you to go in and get the dudes up front that win you national championships, because that's where you go and find them. So I thought that hire right off the rip was probably the best of the cycle. I think there's more to come. I also really like Rashad Samples at Arizona State. He was considered a very high riser with the LA Rams, and within NFL circles was very highly respected. Bringing him back, I mean, you think about these really elite tier running back coaches in the college ranks, right? Like your DeMarco Murray's at Oklahoma, for instance. A good running back coach can bring a lot of really talented guys to you, and if you develop them right, that's the basis of your offense right there. So Samples, Stein are the good ones. Sean Lewis, I don't know how he pulled off that, but I think there's more to come. And God, Lincoln just needs to fire Alex Grinch, man. Like, he can't keep getting away with it. He really can't.
Oh man, what a time to be alive in the Pac-12. Like, I know UCLA and USC are on their way out, but yeah, you said it at the top that it's a great time to be a fan of a Pac-12 program, and as a fan of the Pac-12, as a whole. So, Andrew, we can't thank you enough, man, for joining us. Where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, so the pod's on a bit of hiatus, but I still do plenty of Pac-12 reporting on my Twitter page. It's at _G_Haubner. I cover Pac-12 and high school recruiting in the Sacramento area. You know, I do like Kings and Sac State and all that kind of stuff, but a big portion of the coverage that I do is our local high school football recruiting scene for CBS News. And you know, the litany of schools that are in town and, you know, who's coming where. So the actual feature stuff you can find on cbsnews.com/Sacramento. And yeah, that's those are mostly the two places that I inhabit these days. You know, I lurk on Reddit sometimes. That's the other one.
Yeah, we can't thank you enough, man. Thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to bring you back on when Deion brings him bowling, because we know it's definitely going to happen. And we got to bring you back on because this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. You know, and you mentioned it too, Dylan. Like, yes, you're losing UCLA and USC, but the rest of the conference has been so competent with their hires the last two cycles. A Kalen DeBoer coached Washington, a Dan Lannon coached Oregon, Prime at Colorado, Whittingham at Utah. Like, the conference is in very good hands. I think we just might be okay, fellas.
Well,
Shame
we'll have to
somebody
take
has
your
to
word
lose
for
out.
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah. UCLA and USC might be the losers in this transaction, but we can't wait to see what unfolds. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Doug and John, for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Give us a thumbs up and 5 stars on all the podcast stuff. However all that works, you know how it works. Thank you. We'll see you in the next one.